this conversation, I think it feeds very nicely from John's slide. So he showed the skills and the two jobs. And for me, immediately, that made tons of sense. I'll start with you, Claire, if I may. So what is a skills-first organisation? Why is it important, and why now?
Okay, well, that's 3 questions in one. You're getting your value for money. So
Did you get paid?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't.
Are you going to this? And that's all we've time for, ladies and gentlemen.
Anyway, to answer your first part of your question, what is a skills-based organisation or a skills-first organisation? And it's really where we rethink the job as the primary currency for matching people to the work to be done. So we start to break down the job into the skills, a collection of skills, and we think about our people as a unique constellation of talents and skills. So I like to use the analogy of Lego. It's a bit like if we break it down into a very granular understanding of the work to be done and the people that we have, we can reconstruct that in many different creative ways. And the reason this is really important right now is because, and I'm sure I won't be the first person today to say it, there's a huge skills gap. 3 in 4 employers are reporting that they can't fill the jobs that the vacancies that they have. They can't find the people with the right skills. And that's because we just can't simply train people quickly enough to meet the needs of all the emerging technology. So if you need to go out and hire 30 prompt engineers tomorrow, you're probably as likely to be able to source them from within your organization if you understand the skills that exist in your organization and where there are adjacencies between one role and another role. Yeah.
And that's why I describe it really well. Why is it important now?
Well, because people can't fill these jobs. People need to be able to train their people really quickly. And in order to do that, you need to understand the skills that exist and the skills that they need in the future. And I think we also see, I suppose, so much engagement difficulties for people to have a real range of careers and for organizations to be able to respond to new challenges. It gives agility to organizations and it creates career agility for people.
And how do we do that? How do we get to a point to really understand? It's a very complex thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
To understand the skills framework or taxonomy. There's a lot of language I think is very confusing. How do we do that?
Yeah, so I think, and I'm sure many people here have been involved in very painful competency mapping or competency framework projects over the years. That's not new, but I think what's changed is that we have skills frameworks. So there are some off-the-shelf skills frameworks like the Sophia framework, there's ONET, there's ESCO, there's the World Economic Forum's skills taxonomy, and they're all available, and they provide a starting point. Or there's loads of technologies. There's a whole new category of skills technology that help organizations with taxonomy, with mapping the jobs that they have down into the constituent skills and with understanding and having employees build out their skills profiles too. So they're the two. I suppose, well, the technology in particular is a huge accelerant here.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. I think John's slide actually brings that to life, doesn't it? Like to see the skills and their comparability in different worlds, for me, just immediately gave me a clear sense that's competitive advantage. To understand and know that is a real advantage. Barbara?
Yes.
The answer to your question, 20,000 euros.
Unbelievable.
You're going through a big transformation project yourself at Remote. Would you give us a sense of what that transformation looks like and how you're using a skills-first approach to solve that problem?
Yeah. And just to start, I work for a company called Remote, completely asynchronous, which is important as well in the transformation place. There's 1,300 in the organization and about 200-ish in the sales organization, and that is the one that's undergoing quite a large transformation. The company itself is 5 years old. It started at the beginning of COVID, and primarily it was an employer of record type company, and so that obviously did amazingly during COVID. You know, really high demand, basically everything was inbound. And we were essentially selling that one-trick pony, so it was relatively easy to do. We have since, in the last year or so, really converted to a multi-product company. I won't plug them all here, but look it up online. We've converted to a multi-product company, and with that, we need to transform how people are selling, how we are going to train people on all of the in-depth product knowledge, and also the team is pivoting from the inbound to the outbound. So what does the outbound selling look like? So with that as the backdrop, what we have been doing is we've been projecting kind of 3 to 4 years in advance, what does our business look like, and really mapping how we will sell, who we will sell to, how will AI influence what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, and what capabilities and skills do we need in seat for that to happen. And then mapping that against kind of our current employee base, figuring out the skills gaps, like you said, and then determining exactly what we're going to do here. Are we going to buy in? Are we going to train our current employees? And if we're training, we start to think about how we're going to do that, because given we're remote, given we're asynchronous, given my personal belief that people train and learn in completely different ways, I am not somebody who enjoys sitting in a classroom. I'm more of a doer, or I like to shadow people. And that's how I learn. So trying to think of like just-in-time training for people, little bites. I know somebody was talking about microdosing of learning, little bites of learning as well. And then also we have kind of the self-starter individual who wants to do their own training. So we try and provide like a plethora of approaches to really help enhance the skills of our employee base.
You got me on microdosing.
Is it legal here? I don't know.
Kind of, it's cool, isn't it? It's cool. Interesting, right? And interesting to see its application. So from like a concept or a theory and obviously knowing your world into the reality of the HR leadership or CPO role as you're facing into that transformation. Like I see its use case very, very clearly right now. I want to flip it onto the other side, if I may, with you, Ruth. So Ruth, you're in Udemy. So you guys have like a huge global learning base. So you've got unique insights from the learner side.
Yes.
So I'd love to understand what trends you're seeing, what skills are most in demand, and then we reverse that into this conversation, if that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose for us, obviously AI. Back in December 22, I think we had 10 courses on AI on our platform. As of December last year, we had over 1,200.
Ooh.
In December 22, we had 28,000 minutes consumed on AI. And in December last year, we were up to 57 million minutes consumed on AI in a year.
How many hours is that?
So, don't ask me to do math. But it's amazing. It's the you can actually look at the trend. You can see what individuals want, what companies want. Obviously, with our customers, we can individualize, so that hyper-individualization of training. We can do that in our learning paths. But in terms of the skills that people are looking for outside of AI, you've got a lot of the app development, Java, Python, AWS, those kinds of courses from a technical point of view. From a leadership point of view, it's very interesting actually in terms of what we've talked about today. Empathy, 101% increase on empathy courses. We've also, coaching has gone up 176%. Also, team building has gone up 150%. So there's a lot of courses that are, where we're seeing the gap with that squeezed middle, where we're asking people to manage. I think they did a survey last year in the UK, 84% of people were accidental managers. So, are we actually following that up with training? Are we supporting people to be successful in those roles? And in a lot of places we're not, because we're so busy. There's so many competing priorities for everybody. There's pressure from the marketplace. So I know we talked about, wars on our doorstep in EMEA, for example. How do we help people who are already struggling with challenging targets and all the other things we're asking them to do? How do we help them? How do we support them in learning? Like these things aren't necessarily innate for everybody. They're not natural for everybody. So, everybody's going to have their own strengths, their own development areas. And it's really important that we kind of, I suppose, lean into that as an organization.
You mentioned hard skills, AI. You mentioned soft skills, empathy, teaming, collaboration.
Yes.
They're interesting two sides of the one kind of framework of
Yes.
learning. Stephen Bartlett, Diary of a CEO, you all know him? Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was in this building last Sunday. Last Sunday he was in this building. And he spoke about the concept of skill stacking.
Yes.
Yeah, and the example he uses is Ronaldo, arguably the best footballer in the world. I don't know much about football. I'm seeing some nods in the audience. He's up there, right? But he argues the point. He's not the best defender. Brian, he's not the best striker. He's not the best passer of the ball. But what he does have is unique strength across all of those disciplines and makes him, therefore, a very well-rounded, very competitive footballer at the top of his game.
Yes.
I'd like to just take that back to you, if I may, and I'd love to have a look at. We have Udemy. We have a need. What's stopping the learning? What's the problem, and why can't we learn? And is it what we're offering? Is it how it's consumed? What's happening between the learning and the learner, and how can we close that gap?
That's a great question. And I think something I talk about a lot is the context in which learning happens. And, we can talk about power skills, human skills, the hard skills around AI. But what I'm really interested in, what are the incentives for people to learn? So what are the levers in the organization that affect behaviors? And I think, if you're looking at an AI course without any, application that's going to help you do your job very well, it's detached. It's not totally relevant. And there's been a report put out by the World Economic Forum called "Putting Skills First" just in January. And what's interesting when you look at it's a series of use cases, and if anyone is working on their skill strategy, it's an excellent place to start. But what they're noticing is a huge increase in the amount of learning that is happening, whether that's as measured by time spent, engaging with whether it's Udemy courses or what it is. And I do think that having kind of a skills-based view of your role and your organization, and being able to see that perhaps I don't just have to follow this path up and wait for my manager to get the promotion or to leave. There's other places I can go. It's leading to more self-directed learning, and people have a more intrinsic motivation to pursue things if they can connect it to an outcome for them.
If it's self-directed, though, like we know what we would like to learn, and that's what we're seeing from the learner trends, but we don't know what we need to learn. So there might be a gap between both. Barbara, I'll bring it to you. What are you seeing around the challenges around, say, completion of courses, starting courses? What are you seeing around those critical kind of moments between the learning?
So when I started at Remote, the only training they had was self-learning, self-started. You just had to do it yourself. Nobody pushed it at you. There wasn't any just-in-time alignment with any programs that we were running or anything like that, and people just had to do their own training. So I asked for the statistics, which was, a dramatic move, because everyone's like, oh, we haven't really looked at them yet. I said, okay, so we started with the statistics, and we had 6 or 7% who actually started the courses, and about a 2% completion rate. And this had been going on for 3 years in the company. That is a huge problem for me, and hopefully for the employee base. And really, I think managers weren't prioritizing it, leaders weren't talking about it, and we weren't being very open and direct in how we communicated what was missing from a skills perspective, why you are not meeting expectations, how you need to be showing up, what we expect to see from you in terms of the what and also in terms of the how. And that communication and that whole language was just missing from the company. And also then how people learn. So that's how we've introduced all these various different approaches to learning, and doing more around kind of huddle-based learning, where people are actually building a community and talking about real-life examples, because people remember stories, not stats, and trying to learn that way as well. So we're piloting lots of different things, and we're trying to see what works.
So if Claire said the content of learning is king and the context is the kingdom, it's really important to understand the context. And to bring it on to your question, or your point, Barbara, around the relationship between the learner and the manager, the accountability. Who's accountable for the learning? So you can give a pathway, and you understand the context, and you have the content. So Ruth, I'll bring that onto you. So what works in terms of participation of learning? What do you guys do at Udemy to increase it? And how can we get a competitive advantage through understanding that?
I think for me anyway, personally, and I think in Udemy it starts at the recruitment. So to Barbara's point, you look 3 or 4 years in advance. What you shouldn't really be looking at reactive skills learning. You're always going to be behind. So, what are we going to look for in the future? Or are we going to hire people who have that capacity and that interest and that curiosity to learn? And then when they are in the organization, you need to incentivize that learning. It's going to cost the organization a lot less to hire from within than it is to go out to the market, especially with the shortage of skills in the market. So I would say the incentivization of skills is key, and that's what we do in Udemy. So there's some courses that might be mandatory for compliance reasons or because, we've a very clear vision and that's where we're going. And AI is something that we did a path on last November, and everybody in the whole company had to do it. Now, it wasn't really, enforced as mandatory, but everybody realized that, if career development is important to me, if I want to stay relevant in here or in another organization, if I move on, then I need to stay abreast of these skills because this is where the direction of our industry is going, this is where the direction of our organization is going. And that, for me, is really critical, that we incentivize that and we reward and recognize when people are learning. And in fairness, most people that I've talked to in the workforce over the last number of years, it's remained constant. People do want to learn and grow and develop. So you don't really have to incentivize that much either to do it. But I think it's an important proponent for the organization to consider that.
Yeah, well articulated. And I think if it's just enough content, if it's just for the learner, how do we find it just in time? Somebody mentioned earlier on, how do you find or land the learning when it's needed most? Because that's really difficult. And how do you incentivize the behavior to consume the learning to have the impact? Any thoughts on that, Claire?
Yeah, well, you're reminding me of, I don't know if you've come across Bob Mosher and his 5 moments of need. So there's a whole learning methodology about learning in the flow of work or just-in-time learning. And actually, when I worked at Twitter, we put our learning design team through that program, and it's really it's much more about how you design the work, so that it's less about pulling people into a learning management system to do some formal training. It's about understanding the workflows and the processes and surfacing the least amount of knowledge that they might need in order to progress to the next stage, and really parsing it into small bites that are available in the workflow, not off in the LMS somewhere. They might have to go to the LMS eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Into the workflow. I was just looking at the results of your poll, ladies and gentlemen. So, the number 1 skill, according to you guys, is communication skills. Surprised? No?
No.
Okay. Number 2, critical thinking. Valerie Pierce. How many votes did you cast? Critical thinking.
Yep.
Is it important now?
Yep, absolutely.
Why?
I think you need to have that focus, that commitment on your direction, understanding what your problems are, understanding what your challenges are as a business, and having that, that commitment to go after and communicate your vision to the organization as a leader. I think that's really, really important. I think, people will follow somebody who's passionate, and we talked about this yesterday, but passionate rather than emotional about getting to that point and being successful. And I think you will have people who will follow strong leaders like that.
Trust, compassion, and empathy were the next ones, by the way. Can I bring it back to leadership skills? So the last panel, the way Alison described breastfeeding while being on a Zoom call, the humility to hire a CEO as a founder of a ramped-up organization. There's so many moments of humility, and a word that's overused, authenticity.
Yes.
If you look at that type of leadership, leading with emotional intelligence, as Angela mentioned this morning, can we teach those skills? Can we teach emotional intelligence? And can we teach people to swim on land effectively? Like, how can you do that best? Any thoughts? Barbara?
I think you can teach it. I think it takes time. And I think you can't teach it, I don't believe, through a classroom. I think you teach it through experiential learning. I think you teach it through conversations amongst a community, real life stories, real life examples, and through that trying to help these leaders sit in the shoes of whoever to develop their empathy.
Claire?
Yeah, I'll build on that. I agree, and I think a lot of it needs to start with really deep levels of self-awareness, and really, I suppose, we're in such a period of uncertainty, and at the conversation we had yesterday was like it's a constant. Uncertainty is a constant. And to the Rory Sutherland talk, he talked about the SCARF model. But when we're experiencing that uncertainty, it activates like the threat system. So I think for leaders, it's what can I do to deactivate the threat system for myself and for my team? And I think that does come back to authenticity and trust. And how do you teach that? Well, I think it does have to start with self-awareness. It has to start with real conversations and being able to hold paradox. So there's a tension for a lot of leaders, like, can you speak to the truth of the human experience of the turbulence and hold the company line? And I think a lot of managers really struggle with that. And sometimes it's a case of we need to give permission to do that. But I think if we have the safety in the relationships, no matter what's going on around you, then people can be productive. And I think that's kind of the name of the game.
Clarity is really important when it comes to leadership. We unpacked that earlier on. What you're describing to me, listening to all three of you, is what happens between us. So it starts with the other. But as you say, Claire, it's self-reflection to understand you, and where does that land with the other? So it's what happens between us is what matters most, it sounds to me. And I know later on we're going to be joined by Steve Rowling, who's going to talk about exactly that. How do we land it with the other through story? How do we make it stick? How do we make learning stick? How do we make a message land? So we'll unpack and we'll explore that. But Ruth, I'll give you the final word here. In terms of what's next, like where should we be investing in L&D within our organizations to help us navigate through this turbulence?
For me, I think it's about, and you mentioned Steve Bartlett there, the skill stacking. I think what we've seen, and everybody who's been either participated in or facilitated a talent calibration, will be able to tell you that, you'll have managers that will try to drive through promotion or, recognition in some way, shape or form because of the technical skills that they have. So I think it's really about finding that well-rounded person, and how you do that is you develop them in the areas they need to be developed in. So if you've got a really strong engineer or a really strong salesperson who doesn't have great people skills, you need to get them, developed in that area. And I think that is something that is competitive advantage universally, no matter what your organization, no matter what your industry. I think we have too many people, back to the accidental manager where it was the only career path given to them to go in and manage others, and the damage that can do if that's not your jam, to get down with the Gen Zs, if that's not what you really want to lean into, I think that's really important that we give them those tools. It doesn't come naturally any more than I could go down and write code for something. You need to develop that. I think, even to date, I think this room, I'm preaching to the choir, but I think it's the E-staff, it's top down. It's toned from the top in terms of what we value as organizations and what we will invest in. And I think we really need to invest in those human skills, in just as much as we're investing in AI and tech skills. It's really, really important because, I don't believe AI will replace us, but I do believe we can use it and leverage it as a tool, and it will take away a lot of the manual work, the boring work, so that we can, to the point made earlier, spend the time doing what we need to do with humans.
Got it. It sounds like it falls within our domain, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't it? If they're power human skills, it's not the AI, as Stephanie said, it's a person who knows a bit more about AI, but who knows a lot more about people that will take your job. Ruth, Barbara, Claire, thank you so much